Hey, I'm Sheena Shuey. I'm a registered social worker and host of the 4Q podcast. I'm passionate about normalising, not pathologising life, and that's not easy. So each episode, I have amazing guests on to share the messy, beautiful ups and downs of life in 4 key questions with tips and tricks along the way. There are moments in life where you can embrace your story and understand that it's okay not to feel okay sometimes. So let's get into it. This is the 4Q podcast. Emily, thank you so much for jumping on the 4Q podcast with me today.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. Thanks throughout the time change. I appreciate it.
Oh, I appreciate it on your end too. And for those who obviously don't know us and our connection, it's so funny because I literally was fangirling on Emily on her TikTok account. So then I followed her on Instagram and just over the holiday season, I'm like, I just have this thing when I connect with people and I love their message. I'm like, I need to tell them how awesome they are. So I reached out to Emily and I'm like, I love what you're doing. And then we just kind of connected from there. So I appreciate you coming on after such a quick connection.
Absolutely. Love the internet, connecting people all around the world. The world's getting smaller. So glad that people of shared interests can connect.
Exactly. And I think it's such a great time for if someone has a message to get out like yours, it's such a good time for that. So I guess before we jump into your message and what you're about, I'll just read your bio out for I guess people who may not, or the listeners who may not know you. So Emily helps busy professionals create work-life balance while earning her master's in industrial and organizational psychology and working in corporate training and development. And experiencing personal burnout, she became aware of the lack of comprehensive burnout solutions available, which I definitely can attest to. And so she's taken it upon herself to meet this need. She's worked with professionals from a variety of industries to mediate burnout through proven systems for optimizing time management, stress management, boundaries, personal care, mindset, and that habit lifestyle design. So is there anything more to that? Because that's a pretty comprehensive description there.
Thank you. So I would say if you are looking to self-identify as somebody who has the potential for burnout, if some of those things started immediately ringing a bell, most often I work with high achievers, people pleasers, and people who have the tendency to slip into a victim mindset. Those are the personality types that coincide a lot with that. So I'm sure we'll touch on things of the like, but that's pretty much the basics that you need to know before we jump in.
Yeah, definitely. And so I usually read this bio as part of reflecting like who you are, but let's get into the reflect part of this podcast a little bit more. So tell me a little bit about your own personal burnout story.
Yeah. So as you just kind of shared through my list, I was burnt out by volume. I was working full-time, a graduate student, full-time, going to night classes, 2 to 3 hours a day of public transportation commuting in Chicago where it's freezing. I was coaching part-time. So I was experiencing burnout by volume. There's also burnout by boredom, where you feel uninspired and stuck in your life. And then there's social burnout, and that's with the people pleasers who struggle to set boundaries. But I just had too many items on my plate. I came home depleted, zombie mode, detached. Sometimes I cried, a lot of times I cried, and it was just not how anybody should be living their life. And I had so many friends who were successful by standard merit, just making enough money, living in a fun city. They had friends, they had all these things, and they were so deeply unhappy because they were completely depleted. And even if they had things, they felt like they resented them because they were still taking more of their resources. So I just saw that in myself, I saw that in my friends, and something had to go, and I had to quit my job and focus fully on creating this training in this area because it was so important. And it actually happened before the pandemic, but now that the pandemic is making its rounds, people have been experiencing burnout where they might not have before.
Yeah, definitely. And I think I have been very aware of this whole sphere as well, obviously having a psychology background as well. And Yeah, I think what I love about your work and your story is that you frame it in little, obviously being on TikTok. So for those who are unaware, Emily has over 60,000 people following her on TikTok for a reason, including myself, because it's like these little bite-sized reminders of how did we end up here? Like that's the thing, is like, and I'll touch on this in the redefine in the next bit, but it is around exactly what you're saying, is that there's this so much value of traditional success. So I'm curious to know, in the redefine, how you redefine that for yourself. So now that you've shared that story with us, your burnout story, tell us a little bit about like maybe that really hard moment, or that moment where you started to create new meaning and a new perspective, and how you changed through that. Could you share that with us?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So burnout is a death by a thousand paper cuts. So I would love to like pinpoint the moment where I crashed and burned, but the high achiever in me, that's the identity that I held, that I was like, it doesn't matter because I can always do more. I can always do better. Like my identity depends on what other people see me doing that's valuable. And I got to a point where I was I was creating 7 trainings from scratch and putting it out to an audience of potentially 400,000 people. And it was horrifying, but I was also so numb from the responsibility that I didn't fully acknowledge what I was putting my body through stress-wise. A lot of times we detach from that stress. And I was also traveling the following weekend and had like one of my first like really bad anxiety attacks. And if you are putting off addressing your burnout, your body is going to stop you. A lot of people start to work with me because they get hospitalized or because they have finally driven themselves to the physical point of burnout where they have to take care of it. So basically I had that wake up call moment, and I quit my job shortly after and decided to just focus on coaching because I was also building out my coaching business in all of my quote unquote spare time. So after having that moment, I redefined what a work day, what my lifestyle, what my success would look like for me. And I ditched everything corporate and decided to redefine that within just my own coaching business and only offer things that I really wanted to actually do every day. And so that is how I now shape my business is, will I hate doing this eventually? And if I will, I don't include it.
Yeah, yeah. And there's so many nuggets of wisdom in just what you've said. But I think one of the things that, a common theme with a lot of people that I work with is that people pleasing and that external validation. And that's a big part of being burnt out, because it's like you choose these professions that we're meant to choose, and, you work in a way that's meant to, you get that external validation from people. When you had these moments where it just kind of came crashing down, did you have to do a bit of internal work and look internally around maybe some of that anxiety or people pleasing? Because again, from a psychology perspective, those things can be linked to like a fawn response, or they can be linked to an anxious attachment, or can be linked to a million different things. So did you have to do some of that untangling work yourself?
Oh, yes. And I love that you said like anxious attachment. I just finished the book Attached and it's phenomenal. So if you've read it, I'm glad that you also got the chance to do that. But I think that at our core, we were accidentally raised to overemphasize what other people think of us and then belittle like the things that we are thinking of ourselves, or that like from the moment you enter school, you're told not to go into the arts or go into something that doesn't make any money and to do things that interest you. Instead, we're pushed always towards security and towards the most predictable path, the path that we've seen traditional success in before. And I think the people who are also highly likely to burn out are just the people who were never interested in what they started in to begin with. And now they're just facing the reality of, if I want to start in a new industry, if I want to do something different, I kind of have to be willing to make a lateral move or move down just to have that interest. So when I was just deciding to make that transition. You can't care at all about what anybody thinks. Some people like having haters. They like having people who don't believe in them. That's where like those types of people are like my haters are my motivators, which I don't necessarily identify with. But other people need like blind support. And I knew I needed blind support to make this huge change. And then I just disregard everything else that anybody has to say, unless they're making a good point. I do consider people to give feedback people give me, but I also, I know it doesn't apply to me, can disregard it. And so didn't care, only asked people who I knew would blindly support me making this transition. Didn't talk to anybody who I knew would kind of poo-poo what I was doing and project their fear that they felt about doing something unpredictable onto me, because that's not my fear. I didn't have that to begin with. I don't want to get off the phone with more fears than I came on with. So I think that element is just, it depends on how much you care what people think, and you have to not, you just have to not care at all what other people have to say or think or feedback.
Yeah. And I think one of the themes that I do find in this podcast, since I've been doing it, is it, like in this redefined moment where you take the leap of faith and you do something that really truly follows your core, like who you are. It's interesting because you have to really block out other people's expectations a lot of time, like your parents' expectations or even your partner's expectations. How did you go from maybe being a people pleaser to going, I'm just going to block out that and not care what people say? Because that's like huge. And as someone who I identify as a bit of a, like, I'm similar that way. How do you just make the switch and block that out? Because I can't imagine that's like an overnight kind of switch.
Oh, no, definitely not. So I got, fortunately, a lot of permission I hired a number of business coaches as soon as I knew I wanted to do this, because I believe in taking shortcuts. I believe in hiring experts. I would never ask my clients to do something that I wouldn't do. And I have paid thousands, about more than $10,000 in like coaching, just so somebody can tell me exactly what to do, what to believe, what has worked before. And one of my first coaches said the only opinions that matter are your own, your mentors, so people who know more than you and have done what you're doing, and your clients, because those are the people that you are actually actively working with. And everybody else, it doesn't matter, because they probably don't have the full story. You didn't ask for their input. And unless you're like an influencer where your income and your lifestyle depends on people liking you, I'm not on the internet to be liked. I'm saying things that are very polarizing that a lot of people who are very comfortable with the way things are don't like. And you just kind of go into it knowing that the more polarizing you are, the more people will back you, or the more people will not like you, and they can leave. That's on them if they want to emotionally respond to something I'm saying indirectly. But it's just yourself, your mentors, and the people that you work with, and everybody else doesn't really matter.
Yeah. Well, and I know as a business owner, again, putting myself out on Instagram, on Reels, on TikTok, there's this huge, it's not imposter syndrome, but it's like, oh my gosh, this is such a new world for professionals to enter, because it's this, will it come across as unprofessional? And, like there's so many thoughts that go into it. But I think, Brené Brown's work on vulnerability is amazing. And her thing about other people's opinions is if they're not in the arena, getting the dirt, sweat and blood and tears on themselves by being vulnerable and showing up, then their opinion doesn't matter. And I try really hard to remember that when I'm putting myself out there, because you're exactly right. The internet is just a world where you're not going to get a huge amount of it's not always going to be positive.
No, yeah. And I just think of all the times I really liked something someone said and I didn't say anything, because I just figured, oh, they're probably getting a lot of praise regardless. Like they don't need it from me. And like, I just think to myself, I really like what they're putting out. So then being on the other side, when you are being vulnerable and you're sharing things, when people do say, hey, I really liked this, it means so much. But then there are also the people who are like disagree and they feel like you should know, so they tell you. And then there's this whole pool of people in the middle, which I feel like is the majority. There's the 90% who don't say anything, and you don't know how they feel, but they're still there. So they must like what you're doing, or they would leave. But yeah, love that Brene Brown quote. That's so like just, I feel like I heard that again when Rachel Hollis is like also a very polarizing person, just in her industry and her choices and all of that stuff. And she when was getting a lot of feedback she didn't ask for, and she said that unless like you know everything that's going on in the circumstances, and unless I asked you, then your feedback like doesn't register. And I really like that, because a lot of times you didn't ask, and so it doesn't really matter what people have to say because you weren't asking for permission to do something with your life.
Yeah, exactly that. And so while we're still on the redefine of like, redefining moments and things that change perspective, I'm curious because I know in the reflect as well, you were talking about how not just yourself, but a lot of your friends were really similar in that, they got maybe corporate jobs or like the traditional successful life, successful job, monetary success, as opposed to lifestyle success and all the other successes there are. I'm curious, when you started changing and when you took the leap of faith, like I'm done, like this is unhealthy for me, did that have an effect on your circle and how they saw it? And second point to that, I'm only asking because I have found that as I change every year and grow as a person, and I focus more on lifestyle changes too, it definitely changes your tribe. Like it changes your vibe, it changes your tribe. How did you manage that? And what was the effect in your circle?
Yeah. So I think that a lot of them might have considered like doing something independently, like independent contracting or starting their own business, that probably thought about it before, but until you see it so up close and you watch somebody do it, you might not actually consider taking that leap and taking that charge. So I've gotten to see some people who were really inspired by it. I've gotten to see some people who like have never talked to me before come out of the woodworks and like now want to talk to me about those kinds of things. But I am very introverted, so I have a very close group of friends that I made in college, and I have not made that many friends since then. So because they've seen me through all of that, we all had bouts of unemployment, we all had like shitty jobs, we all had really great jobs that aligned with us, like we've gotten to see all of it. So fortunately, I didn't have to do too much shuffling in my circle, but I did make more like coaching acquaintances, I would say. Now I have people who, when I need somebody to just immediately understand what I'm saying, I can go to them and talk to them about different like things that other people who don't do it probably don't know about. Just like I'm sure you can do with other people who run podcasts. There's just a different language that you're speaking with them. So in that way, I have had to expand to people who just know what it's like to have like, the whole spectrum of emotions that go into being 100% dependent on just yourself.
Oh, 100%. And I think we're going to connect after this podcast when I press stop. So on the record button for sure. So let's talk about the redesign. So the redesign, which is the third R, like the third question of our 4Q4 question podcast, is really around, after these hard moments and these, life-changing moments, what were the tools that you used to redesign your life for the better? And do things differently in a way that really serves people? How did you change things and redesign everything?
Yeah, absolutely. So, and I know you listed these in the beginning, but just kind of walking through them again, there's time management. So actually doing the things with my time that are a priority and making them happen, just like without any type of excuse, because now, especially when you work for yourself, you really are just the keeper of your time. Stress management, being able to manage your own day-to-day experience and catch the things that cause you the most stress and then find ways around them. Time management, stress management, boundaries. I love boundaries, and I feel like I've gotten very good at setting them, which is great because I lead others to setting boundaries with people and things that are not working just objectively. And then personal care, having that maintenance, which is the things that keep you taking care of yourself, things like groceries, cleaning up your apartment, having clean like clothes, food, things. And then rest, which is genuinely restful, relaxing activities. And then refill, which is actually having fun, like seeing friends, smiling, lighting up, going on like a date night or something like that, making sure that all of those are incorporated in your personal care. It's not just one mental health day once every other month to try to like get all your resources back. It's a consistent thing. And then mindset. So if you're any of the three identities that I listed before, the high achiever, people pleaser, victim mentality, that you get your mindset right. And then that you just optimize that habit and lifestyle design to make sure that everything that you are adding to your life adds value. Sometimes you have to do crummy things, and that's just how like it goes for a certain season of life. But you are also taking care of yourself. You're like looking at your data objectively of how you're spending the hours of your day, what is going well, and where you're making choices that you don't even like. Like some people are like, oh, I spent all of Saturday watching Netflix and I'm not happy with that. I wish I did other things as well, but I just couldn't get myself to do it in the moment. And so it's building systems that work against the natural resistance we have because we're primitive creatures that like rest. So building systems that push you towards and make the life you want inevitable alongside getting the things done at work that need to get done. So that is kind of how you rebuild.
Yeah, well, I mean, again, so much to pull from that. There's so many avenues in my mind that I want to go on. But I guess a couple of things. I think from what you're saying, it really sounds like it's habit forming. It's like creating habits that aren't probably natural in the beginning. But, you know, again, like that analogy that we use in psychology all the time, it's like when you're learning to drive a car, it's so slow and it's clunky until over time you just do it without even thinking, you know, blindly. So it sounds like a lot of your work is creating those habits. And then I guess second to that, linking to that, I know you mentioned that you're really good at setting boundaries, and boundaries are a big part of your practice. It's something I encourage in mine too, because it's been a journey for myself to learn how to implement, how to have very strong boundaries. Do you think that setting boundaries has always been something that you've always done, or has it been, again, a habit that you've had to form? And the reason that I ask this is because in my teaching and you know, I say this a lot on my Instagram and things like that, you end up feeling like the bad guy when you set the boundary. And it's such a concept people have to get used to, of like, you know, you end up feeling guilty even though you're doing the right thing. So can you tell us about, like, how did you become so good at setting boundaries?
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of like just the progression of boundaries, you start out as a child and you depend on your authority for pretty much everything. So you want to make them happy. And so when things are asked, you don't really have the authority to push back and say, no, I don't want to do that. I'm not going to do that. And so you go from being a child in a home to being in school where you're also not given permission to push back because you're not authority. And then you go and you have the same experience in college, and then you go to the workplace and you're a new employee. And so you still don't feel like you have the right to push back. And there's not a day where you magically wake up and you're like, I am the authority now. I have the right to express this boundary. It's such a shift in beliefs and a shift in understanding of what a boundary is, and that it's not asking for permission anymore. It's just telling people what you're available for and what you're not. And you do that a lot in, you know, personal relationships, where if somebody does get upset about a boundary, what they're saying is not like, I'm mad at you because you won't do this. They're saying like, I want that resource to be available to me. I'm experiencing like a stress response to you not giving me that resource now. And I'm trying to project that onto you so that you can be responsible for the bad feeling, and I'm not responsible for the bad feeling. And so it's not even letting that person's stress like penetrate your skin. Like it's just understanding as soon as somebody starts giving you a guilt message, like they're upset, they don't have access to my resource, and that has nothing to do with me because I know that resource is not available. And thinking of it very logistically instead of emotionally, even though people try to invite you into the emotions, because even in work, like a lot of times people will say, I don't have time for this. Unfortunately, I don't have capacity. And if people say guilty messages like, well, we were really hoping we could depend on you. You're usually reliable. Like, can you make more time for this? They hope that by inviting you into that emotional place, that you can, if you feel enough of something, you can magically make more time appear. Like, oh, well, I feel really guilty, so I guess I'll just come up with this extra hour. No, that's not the case. You just feel bad enough that you create an extra hour for them. And so there's so much I could talk about on the topic of boundaries, but yeah, that's the essence of the transformation you have to make personally in order to set them.
Yeah, totally. And look, I think, again, boundaries, it's such a big topic, and the people pleasing and the connections between people pleasing and boundaries is really tricky. I know in the membership that we've launched, or we're launching, Wild Ocean Co., one of the things I do try to get people to reflect on is possibly what attachment they have. And going back to that kind of anxious attachment, if you identify as someone who's anxiously attached, which is a whole nother thing we can talk about, but for people who know what we're talking about here, you do tend to invest more in relationships than maybe other attachment styles. And so that's why it's so easy for people to manipulate you, because you value that relationship, right? How do you get people aware of manipulation in the workplace? And I ask this because it just seems like normal everyday work to say those things, exactly what you were just saying, like the way that people word it, like, oh, we were really hoping, blah, blah, blah. That just seems like a normal everyday email that you would receive, but it's actually quite manipulative when you pull it apart. How do you sort of get people woke on that, like make people realize like what is happening?
Yeah, absolutely. So I recommend always creating space before any ask, like not even just during a busy season, but if somebody asks for something or walks up to the desk and asks for something, to say, what is it? About how much time will it take? When do you need it by? And then can I check my calendar and get back to you? And then creating that space to ask, like, did they not take enough responsibility for their work, and so they're trying to push some of it onto me? Or is this a totally reasonable ask and they just mismanaged their time this one time, and I can like go and support them? You're never trying to be unhelpful, but creating that space just allows you to look at their ask objectively and decide if you do have capacity for it. And then it's not all or nothing. You can let them know, like, I can only do, like, you asked for XYZ, I can only give you X, and I can give it to you by tomorrow end of day. Does that work for you? And if that doesn't work for them, but the other things you're doing in your time are doing your job, you shouldn't feel like you're going to get in trouble for doing your job.
Yeah, 100%. So love that. Absolutely love that. So let's get into the fourth element, the fourth question, which is around, I guess, realign. So, after going through this big journey and starting your business and all of that, like, what is life like for you now? So, what's your current joys and happiness, and how do you stay on track after having gone through this burnout journey?
Yeah, absolutely. So just like a typical week for me, Sunday, I I still get Sunday scaries anxiety just because it's a natural human thing. If you're going from a state of rest to a state of having responsibility, for the same reason we get anxious when we go to open our emails, you're going to have some type of stress response because things are suddenly asked of you. You're exiting that state of rest. So on Sundays, I do a brain dump and then take out the things that I know I need to do that day, and then plug everything else into my week so I know when it's going to get done. And that way, if I do experience any anxiety, the entire time I can tell myself there's nothing I need to be doing. It's just anxiety moving through my body. So then I can address the physical anxiety, and that's just reading, taking, like, I don't know, walk around the block, like whatever it is for anybody. Mondays, I have marketing Monday. So I prepare all my marketing for the week because I do primarily social media marketing. And then Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, I have all of my client calls and strategy calls, and I'm pretty much just like on Zoom all day. And then Friday is just a building day. So any like feedback I've gathered throughout the week, I apply that to my programs, or I'm building out new programs, or I'm listening to audiobooks because I really like consuming and learning in that way. And I would say I work between the hours of, my morning routine is 7 to 8 a.m. And then I work until about, well, it depends on if I have client calls, but if I don't have client calls until about 4 or 5, but if I do have client calls, then I'll take a longer break in the middle of the day, work out, and then have client calls for those who are working during the workday, so we have to do them later. And I just incorporate everything I love. Like if I want to make time for something, then I have a firm grasp on what my week looks like and plug it in where it can go, and then reinforce it with things that will make it easier when the time comes. So if you're trying to include things that are just objectively not like the most fun things, like working out, then again, with those habits, you just want to reinforce them as much as possible and make things appealing to you that you know you want to include. So yeah,
Yeah.
that's what the week looks like.
Yeah, and what about you know, I know that that's sort of like your professional week. What do you do though in terms of keeping yourself on track personally? Like, do you have tools that you do, you know, so one of the things I often talk about is just doing like a weekly reflection to really just tune in what's working and what's not, and to really sort of get in connected with that gut. Oh, sorry, just give me 1 second. Sorry about that. So yeah, I was just saying how, you know, I really encourage people to once a week really tune into themselves and their gut and their intuition, just to make sure that things are aligned, before, you know, you go months without reflecting and going, oh, my relationship's struggling, or, you know, my parenting's really struggling, or I haven't been exercising and eating, you know. So what tools do you use to sort of personally stay in a good space and connected to your stress response?
Yeah. So I encourage morning meetings with yourself. So before my workday even starts, I put on headphones with upbeat music, and I just plan my day out, what my ideal day would look like, beginning to end. And then I just encourage everybody to aim for that as much as possible and to continue to hold themselves accountable to their data, which is like very left brain way to think about, basically what you said about like trusting your intuition, seeing what is in alignment, what is not, but looking at how you're actually spending the hours of your day and calling yourself out on things that are not even aligning with you, but that you are doing consistently. And so doing that during each of the weekdays. And then on the weekends, I usually encourage people to do like a Sunday check-in, that has them walk through the like different types of rest that I named the maintenance, refill, rest. And then I encourage everybody to just walk through the 5 areas of life quarterly, which is business, health, social, personal, and lifestyle. And in each of those areas, identify what the best version of it would look like for you, and then what that would look like on a week to week and then day-to-day basis, so that you know that the only thing that is stopping you from doing those things is just actually doing them. It's not that you don't even know what they are.
Yeah, I think that's just wonderful advice, and yeah, very similar. I think looking at those 5 areas regularly is really helpful. I know the reflection tool I use is based on that biopsychosocial spiritual model. So it's like, okay, biologically, what's going on? You know, psychologically, what's going on for me? Socially, like, did I see anyone this week that was not a client or not a workmate or not my kids? You know, like if you're a stay-at-home mum or something like that, like, did you actually connect with people this week? So things like that. And then obviously spiritually, but that's just like your values and your core beliefs. It's not always like a religious based thing. So yeah, so I think that, yeah, our practices obviously align so much because they work, right? Like these things work for people, especially in nowadays where I just think, and you do this really well with educating people around the fact that no time in history has been so stressful as now. Like the expectation on people and how much we're meant to have as our load, especially women, you know, with parenting and being the perfect wife and looking, you know, a certain way. How do you make people realize that maybe our lifestyles aren't really normal or natural?
Yeah, definitely not sustainable. I agree with that so much. I think that the more transparent people are about how they do what they do and the way that they do it, and that it's not for everybody, like everybody will have a completely different version of what a successful lifestyle or just a happy lifestyle looks like for them, then the more we won't see like the Instagram highlight reel of people's life and be like, shit, I should have saved. I should also be buying a new car. When in reality, you don't even want a new car. Or like, oh, I should go like work out. But then it's like, well, I mean, do I really not need to work out, or has the market just convinced me I need to work out? Because I'm probably fine. And so just that awareness and having other people in your life who also like have their own version of happiness and are really unapologetic about it. Because we're always, I feel like just women, but everybody in general are always apologizing that we aren't 100% in every category, when some of those categories we don't even want to be 100% in.
Yeah, 100, like I could not agree more. And I guess my final sort of thought that I wanted to ask you around was just because I'm so lucky to actually have you on here and I've been wanting to pick your brain like crazy. One of the things I've been exploring in the research and just exploring sort of concept in my own mind is, you know, when we're in school, we're very much, you know, and leading up to university or leading up to graduating and starting a life, we're very much taught career first, lifestyle second, you know, and there's this thing, again, on women, like marrying a successful man means marrying a man who earns a lot of money and things like that. Like there's just a lot of career first, lifestyle second, you know, making that sacrifice of your lifestyle. Why do you think it's not taught so much that we need to think about what kind of lifestyle we want and then matching careers to that?
I think that absolutely should be where people are headed. I think that it's just the way that things have been done, and it would take a good amount of footwork to redo the education system and to create a gap year where you're required to go shadow 10 different jobs or talk to 10 different people. You don't even need a whole year to do it, but having this period of time where 18-year-olds actually explore what that career looks like long term. Like there's just not enough, I want to use a different word than research, but research done in the selection phase. Usually people choose things based on what their parents are telling them is a successful career. That's how I almost ended up in nursing, which, let me tell you, if I was a nurse in this pandemic, I would have quit immediately. God bless the nurses. And you know, you base it on what your friends are doing or what you see as traditional success. There's just not enough research. So I think that would need to happen. And there's the same resistance and like not having an 8-hour workday. So much experimentation and research would need to be done industry to industry in order to make that transition. And people don't have the bandwidth. They don't have the capacity. There's not enough time and resources to actually do that unless you hire probably a really expensive consultant. So people tend to choose the path of least resistance, and usually that's the systems we already have.
Yeah. Well, if you ever decide to start a petition for a non-traditional 9 to 5 work week, because I very much, again, like my practice as well is around, you know, we have rhythms, like natural rhythms. So myself and one of my best friends, she's a complete night owl, right? Like her window of excellence or whatever is the afternoons to the evenings. That ain't me. I am a morning person. Like if I could work from the time I get up, that would be optimal, but I have a kid, so I can't. But you know, like everyone has a natural rhythm. And if you tell me to do something in 6 hours or 8 hours, I'm always going to get it done. It's just, if you give me extra time, I'm probably going to procrastinate on it, you know? So if you ever in that sphere, I'm definitely advocating for that, because, you know, as a fellow solo business owner, I often think about the future and dream about, okay, when I do have a team one day and things like that, I'm not going to get anyone who's working 40 hours a week. You know, like, tell me what your natural flow is. What is your flow state? What does that look like? And let's work that way, you know?
Yeah, definitely. To be a team lead, yes.
Wouldn't that be great,
like
right?
all those bad management experiences you have together and then not do any of those things.
Yeah, exactly. So listen, Emily, thank you so much for hopping on the podcast. I hope everyone who's listening gets as much out of it as I did. And you've got so many more resources on your TikTok and on your Instagram and on your website. So let us know, where can people find you if they want to connect and learn more from you?
Yeah. So my handle on all social media is Emily B Ruth. And then my website is burnoutmanagementprogram.com. That will link you to the different offers that I have. I have an 8-week one-on-one coaching program, a burnout mini course if you want something independent and don't actually want to talk to me, that is totally fine. And then strategy calls, which are just one-off calls. And I eventually get to all of my DMs if you wanted to message me. It just might take me a little bit, but I'll get back to you.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for connecting. I'll put your socials and your handles and all that in the show notes. But again, thank you so much for coming on. And yeah, I guess we'll speak to you soon.
Thank you so much as well. Thank you.
Okay, bye.